Hey everybody, I hope you and your families are doing really well wherever in the world you are. In today's video, we're going to talk about language requirements for Canadian immigration. I am Hassan Shariq, a licensed Canadian immigration consultant based in Toronto, Canada. Through my social media platforms, I upload videos about Canadian immigration. Do consider subscribing if you want to be notified about Canadian immigration in general and the updates and policies as they come through. In today's video, we'll talk in general about the language requirements for Canadian immigration. Anybody who's interested in skilled migration to Canada, express entry, or in general any kind of economic immigration to Canada must show their language ability, their proficiency in one of Canada's two official languages. And these are English and French. A common question is if it is mandatory to sit for an IELTS or a language test for Canadian immigration. Now, if you are interested in skilled migration to Canada, no matter from where you are, you have to sit for a language test. I'll give you an example. If you are somebody who was born in Ireland, Scotland, or any other English speaking country or a French speaking country, and English and French are your native languages, and if you wish to migrate to Canada as a skilled migrant, you are still required to take a language test, IELTS or a French test. So, how to prove your language proficiency? Now, to prove your language proficiency, you have to sit for one of the four designated language tests, two for English, and there are two for French. For English, it is IELTS and CELPIP. IELTS, the widely known International English Language Testing System, and CELPIP stands for Canadian English Language Proficiency Index Program. CELPIP is not so widely known and it is only offered in 6 countries of the world, and these countries are Canada, USA, Philippines, UAE, India, and China. Keep in mind that for IELTS as well as CELPIP, for the purpose of immigration, you have to take the general module and not the academic module. In terms of the tests which are there for French, there are two. Their abbreviation is TEF and TCF. Now, TEF and TCF are abbreviations of French words, and because I'm not proficient in French, so I'll take some help for their pronunciation. So, TCF
Test de connaissance du français pour le
and TEF.
test d'évaluation de français pour le
All these language tests have their own scoring grids. And for the purpose of Canadian immigration, to keep it standardized, there is a terminology which is widely used, CLB. Now, all of you who've explored Canadian immigration at any level know that for various programs, the language requirements are always mentioned in the form of CLB. CLB stands for Canadian Language Benchmarks. To look at the connection of CLB and the corresponding scores, let's have a detailed look at CLB levels and the scores that it corresponds to with various tests, and more specifically for IELTS.
So looking at the different CLB levels, first of all, we'll have a look at CELPIP, which is the Canadian English Language Proficiency Index Program. It is pretty simple for this. Each CLB level, so CLB levels are from 4 to 10. You would see that whenever a requirement in terms of language proficiency is mentioned, it would always mention in the form of CLB level. And as already mentioned, this stands for Canadian Language Benchmarks. So CLB level, and it is also, as I've mentioned already, that it is for each of the four modules, which is reading, writing, listening, speaking. So in terms of CELPIP, it is simple. Each CLB level corresponds to the score in that particular module. So CLB level 7 means 7 in reading, 7 in writing, 7 in listening, and 7 in speaking. So goes for other. Now moving towards IELTS, which is the more widely taken exam. So for this, again, as I mentioned, so CLB levels are from 4 to 10, and for each of the module there is a corresponding score. So if it is said, and it sort of varies, so we'll start from the lowest where there is CLB level 4. So CLB level 4 means that in reading, if you have a score of 3.5, in writing, if you have a score of 4, listening, if you have a score of 4.5, and speaking, if you have a score of 4. Whereas if we move up and we see CLB 7, which is the requirement for express entry, it means 6 in reading, 6 in writing, 6 in listening, and 6 in speaking. And if we move to the top of the table, we see that CLB level 9, rather we'll do CLB 9, which is the golden number that a lot of applicants require. CLB 9 in all modules means reading 7, writing 7, listening 8, and speaking 7. So the point to convey over here is that if it is CLB 9, it doesn't mean 9 in all, and it doesn't also mean that it will be same in each of the modules. For a particular CLB, it can differ. So this is how CLB is for IELTS, and you can have a look at this chart on Google. You'll find this. Now for the French test, again, it is CLB 4 to 10. I wouldn't go into too much detail because not a lot of people probably who would be watching this video will be looking for this, but this chart gives the details of that as well, where for each module, reading, writing, listening, and speaking, you have a corresponding score with CLB, but it is more of a range because these particular tests, both of these, the TEF as well as if you see TCF, they have a range. So if you have a score within that range, you will be obtaining that particular CLB level. Yeah.
Now that you've explored CLB levels in detail, let's look at some of the common questions and queries. A lot of people ask if they are required to show their proficiency in both of these languages, English and French. So the answer is no. You have to nominate one of these as your main language and take an exam, a test for that particular language. Now, if you have some proficiency in the second language as well, that will definitely help you score a little more points, especially if you have proficiency in French, and if French is your main language that you speak or you can speak, you have a lot of benefits because then there are various streams which are only and only for speakers of French language. The province of Quebec attracts French speakers because it's a French speaking province. So French speakers do have an added advantage over people who just have proficiency in English. An important aspect to keep in mind with regards to the language test is that these tests are considered valid for a period of 2 years from the date you take that test. Now, for applicants who are part of Express Entry pool or who are part of any other pool of applicants for a province, it is your responsibility to keep your language tests updated, and you have to have a valid test before your PR's application submission date. If your language test expires anytime before you submit your PR application, it will be considered invalid. One very widely asked question is if it is mandatory for an accompanying spouse to submit a language test as well. Now, keep in mind, and this is more so for express entry applicants, that if you are applying along with an accompanying spouse, for each of the different factors for which you score your CRS points, you score a little less number of CRS points compared with somebody who is applying as single or non-accompanying spouse, even if you have same credentials. So you will be missing a few points. If you, as the main applicant with an accompanying spouse, still score high enough CRS points and you feel that you have a good chance of being invited, there's absolutely no need for a language test by your spouse. It's not mandatory. It is only the main applicant for which it is mandatory. But as I mentioned, that you will be scoring little less points compared with somebody who's applying single or non-accompanying spouse. So you might be at a disadvantage. And if your spouse goes on to take a language test, they can add some points in your application. Over here, I would like to mention that for the main applicants, and this is again more so for express entry applicants, there is a certain requirement for the language scores, for CLB scores. These days, we're talking of CLB 9. For your spouse, that requirement is not there. Whatever score they are able to obtain in each of the modules, they will be scoring points accordingly. And again, it's not the overall, it's each of the module that they score points and add into your application. Lastly, I would like to mention that some people do ask if it is the overall or the average IELTS score that is used for immigration purposes. That's not the case. That is the case a lot of times when it comes to admission processing. But for the purpose of immigration, and specifically Canadian immigration, if a requirement is mentioned as CLB 9, that means CLB 9 in each of the modules of your language test. So it is not the overall, like a lot of times people quote when it's IELTS that I have an overall score of 7.5. Now that does not really matter. What matters is that what score did you have in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So even if you have a CLB 9 in three of them, but you have a CLB 8 in one of those, and maybe your overall score corresponds to a CLB 9, still you are considered at CLB 8. So why is that there is a requirement, or there is a requirement for strong language ability? Now, Canada, when it attracts skilled migrants, it has an objective and a desire to help them become economically established in Canada. And for that, you need to have good enough language skills so that you're able to communicate well with people who are already here. And for that, you need to have good enough proficiency in English or French. So, if you're serious about Canadian immigration, then stop making excuses and start working on your language scores. With this, I conclude the video for today. Hopefully, I've been able to provide some valuable information to you, make it easy so that you understand what are the requirements. If that is the case, then do provide your feedback. Do not forget to like the video. Until the next time that we meet through another video, take very good care of yourself and your families.